We Get Outdoors Nation, today is a fascinating episode of the podcast because today we get to go and wonder about what it is that happens between your ears as you're out in the outdoors, and in particular, maybe how you think about things when it really matters. With today's guest is an expert at how the mind works and also has got a very, very credible open water swimming background that I want to go and jump into. And so without further ado, Micha, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, for those who haven't heard about you, what should the world know about Micha Shaw?
Well, let's see. I grew, like we just spoke about briefly, I grew up kind of all over the place. So I grew up in Washington, Alaska, England, and South Africa. And swimming was my main sport. I swam at Berkeley. And then 2 years after graduating, I got into open water swimming. And that's kind of where my journey with the mental side of sports really began. Or at least my journey of actually working on the mental side of sports. Because in college, I was really intimidated. I struggled with nerves and just really believing in myself and performing consistently at my best. So when I had the opportunity to start open water swimming, I actually had no experience with the race. It is for those that don't know, and I wouldn't be surprised if you don't, because it's a tiny little sport, but it became an Olympic sport in 2008. And at the time in college, I should back up. In college, I started swimming. I moved from Alaska to California, and I became an ocean lifeguard. So I learned how to swim in the ocean in college. And then I started competing in local ocean races and lifeguarding competitions, which is still my favorite competition to date, which is even a smaller sport. And when I graduated from college, I just retired because I wasn't a national caliber athlete. I didn't really have a reason to keep swimming. Definitely not a feasible way to swim professionally. But when I heard that open water swimming was an Olympic event, the event is a 10K, so a little over 6 miles. I was talking to my dad about it, and he was like, "You should do it. I'll support you." And I quit my job, and I started swimming. I had this vision of what it would look like, and I always wanted to be like a mermaid and just like train at the beach all day and, live this like beach lifestyle. That's kind of what I thought open water training would be like. But the reality was a ton of yardage in a pool, and traveling all over the world, which was an amazing experience. But I started working with a mental skills coach when I started training for open water, because I didn't want to have any regrets, or I always had this sense that if I could just get out of my own way, that, I could really sort of tap into what my potential is, or what the sort of where I could go. So that was how I got into open water, and a little bit started my journey with like the mental side of sports.
What was it about open water that drew you to it?
I think it was exciting because it was this new sport that it was really up and coming. There wasn't like an established group of athletes that were excelling in it. So I kind of was able to worm my way in there. When I showed up at the team that I started training with, I was the oldest athlete. I was the slowest athlete. And I just showed up and, worked hard every day and sort of built my way up through, it's a small competitive group of people. But I just, worked every day to sort of achieve this goal. That seemed so far away. Like I was embarrassed to actually tell people I was a professional athlete training for the Olympics, because I felt like I had no business doing that. When I first started racing, I was pretty much the worst one. But in 2 years, I slowly built my way up, and I won the national championships to represent the US at the World Championships in Spain. And that was where they picked the Olympic team. And fortunately, I didn't make the Olympics, which is another part of my journey through to mindfulness and the mental side of sports. But yeah, it was really exciting. There was just like so much possibility. And like I touched on earlier, I had this like vision of me being, playing in the waves every day. That would be part of my training. And just going on these like awesome ocean swims every day. So that sort of that mermaid life was definitely appealing to me.
Wow, that's so cool. That is so cool. And it's really interesting. I've worked and spent time with a lot of high performers, both in professional sport and also in the sort of high-end business world, CEOs of very fancy businesses. And a lot of them identify with the word fraud. Like they recognize that on paper, they're as good as they think they are. And yet there's something inside of themselves that feels like they don't quite deserve to be there, or they might get caught out at some point in time. Or found out. Is that what you experienced?
Yes, definitely. I think I first started experiencing that in college. I transferred to Berkeley. So I showed up from a community college where I performed really well, and I was a top performer on my team. And then I showed up at Berkeley with training with Olympians and national champions, and I was so intimidated. I just felt like everybody belonged there. Everybody was better than me, even though I was there. I got recruited. I had a scholarship. I couldn't really get past that. It was a major hurdle for me. And that's what I worked really hard on with open water swimming. And I worked with the mental skills coach. And when I think this was the part that I had the hardest time with, but with sort of that imposter syndrome, is when I got to the World Championships was the first time that I felt like I really belonged. Like I knew, like deep in my bones, I had put the work in, that I belonged there, that I had a chance, that I was a competitive athlete that had the opportunity to make the Olympics, which was my lifelong dream. And then I didn't make it. So it was this heartbreaking experience not making the Olympics, but I also felt really confused. Like I worked so hard to feel like I belong. And then I finally feel like I belong. And then I didn't make it. And so that took me a long, long time to sort of work through, because it was painful and confusing and heartbreaking.
It's very interesting. I worked with an athlete at London 2012 Olympics, and his journey and his thought process is not too dissimilar to what you're describing, but he actually won a gold medal. And he went through this process of feeling like he didn't belong, then feeling like he did belong. And then the moment the gold medal got put around his neck, he said, I don't belong again. And it was a really interesting thing. I was like, well, for what highest positive purpose do you choose to say that? He's like, well, because now I am the one, and everybody else is the group. And yet again, I don't belong. And it's a very interesting feeling of belonging, not belonging, and then not belonging again. That I don't know. It's like an emotional roller coaster of being a professional athlete, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I held so much shame on my experience and didn't really talk about it. And then when I did start talking about it and asking my friends and teammates about their experience, whether, you made the Olympics and won a gold medal or didn't make the Olympics or whatever it is people are dealing with the same issue. And, we're all sort of like trying to figure it out. And that was really empowering for me, because I kind of thought like, oh, I shouldn't share my experience, or, everyone has it together. I'm the only one that's like freaking out. And then I started talking about it and I'm like, oh, I am not the only one. Like, this is very common, and, and we're stronger, there's a sort of a unifying bond over all of that, all of those experiences.
My my business partner Mark says that when people look like they've got it together and got it together more than anybody else, there's only one of two things that's happening: either their fake it ability is better than anybody else's, or they're just a narcissist, and there's nothing in between.
Yeah, probably.
That's his take.
Yeah. I can kind of see that.
Yeah, because he's the national. Well, he was up until the end of 2020 was the national field hockey coach for South Africa, and so he's been to the Commonwealth Games and all those things. And that's his take on the world. They're either faking it better than anybody else or narcissist. As it pure and simple.
Yeah. And I mean, I've met a lot of people that are really good at faking it till they make it. Like that description, I've never really been able to embrace, because that's a struggle for me. But I know lots of people that do it and they do it well.
Do you think that the fake it to make it's a healthy thing in the long term for people? Do people end up faking it to making it and just end up living in a weird reality that isn't really true if they do it too long?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I guess with my own experience, I see that I've sort of held myself back because I constantly feel like I need to learn more. I'm not ready yet. And there's value in just like diving in and figuring it out as you go. And so that's something I've been trying to challenge myself with more lately. However, I think if you're always kind of faking it till you make it, and you're not really, learning from your mistakes, or, learning more and being curious about what you're doing, then that could potentially be kind of problematic. But I think definitely for myself, I think sometimes I could just go for it, and that would probably be a beneficial thing for me to do.
I had a sports psychologist once ask me the question, so if you're not ready now, when will you be ready? And what would signify the fact that you were good enough? And I sat there, and you have those questions that you wrestle with, and maybe even part of that question 20 years later still wanders around my head. Like, I just don't know. And what they were trying to drag me towards was, you may never believe you're good enough, so just go and get on with it.
Yeah.
But that's a really hard thing to do when that's not what we're told to do throughout schooling or parenting or the church or all sorts of places. It's a very, very hard barrier to overcome.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you back that up though with like hard work, you don't just like kind of throw yourself out there and you're like, oh, I'm just going to keep faking it. But you actually are still working to, make it happen, and whatever, if that's sports or life or family or business, that you back it up with hard work.
Mm. So you mentioned two interesting things in the past few minutes, and the first one that I want us to chat around is the idea of consistency. You said you were looking to get that consistent level of performance, and I think anybody who does anything, whether it's at work, whether it's a hobby in the outdoors, whether it's jogging in the mornings, I think everybody is striving for consistency. And I wonder if it's a form of perfection and I don't know whether it's truly achievable or not all of the time. What do you think?
That's really interesting. I got to think about that one a little bit. I've definitely realized in the last couple of years that I feel silly saying this, but I always thought like perfectionism, like if I was a perfectionist, I would be very organized and have a very clean house, which I don't feel like I don't have either. But I've noticed through like just getting older, these perfectionist tendencies that I have, and I can see that through my athletic career and now with motherhood and grad school and my meditation practice, like everything, just how hard I can be on myself. I guess when I think of consistency, when I look back on my sort of experience with open water swimming, I mean more the consistency of, I felt like I didn't really understand why is it sometimes I would show up to race and I would feel really nervous and it was overwhelming and scary and I would swim well. And, why, it seemed like it was, what's the word I'm looking for? Haphazard. I didn't really understand sort of how, the process, everything. So consistency, I think more with the mental side doesn't mean, I don't take that to mean that every time you show up, you are performing at your best. But you're consistent with your effort and also being able to look at your mistakes, and not have them drag you down, if that makes sense.
How did you find, we all have days where we wake up in a funk. The day, I don't know why, you wake up in the morning and you just feel more grumpy than other days. And yet you have a race or you have a thing you need to go and achieve. What strategies or tools or things did you learn and develop to kind of help yourself out of the hole and actually go and get in the water and genuinely swim a good time? Or what do you give to other athletes, performers, or people to try and do the same for themselves?
Yeah. I think a big thing for me was routines. So, the morning of a race, I had pretty specific with routine with how I got ready, what I ate. So even if I felt a little off, I focused on how I was preparing for the race, and also knowing that you don't have to feel great to swim great or to perform well. You can kind of hold those things separately. But if you, look into, wake up and you're like, oh, well, I don't feel great, so that means I'm going to, perform poorly, then you probably are. But if you can just kind of accept okay, maybe you are kind of grumpy. Maybe you didn't sleep. I usually didn't sleep well before a big race because I was really nervous. So, I never really woke up I feel like I have so much energy, but, I also would wake up really early. So I wouldn't have time, I had plenty of time to do everything that I needed to do. So, so I think routines for me, and I think for other athletes are really helpful. The last several years, I've really have kind of taken a deep dive into mindfulness and meditation. And I think the practice of accepting, the present moment for what it is, and not trying to change it or judge it is a very valuable practice, just to accept this is how to not put a lot of meaning into every single thing, just because you're grumpy or angry or you had a fight with a significant other or whatever it is, that doesn't have to, translate into every other aspect of your performance.
What is, so there's interesting words that are getting bounced around lots by lots of people. Mindfulness is one, being present is another one. And a lot of people hear those words and are like, well, that's very interesting, but what practically does that mean? And how can people go about increasing the amount of time they have that obtained for themselves for?
Yeah. I think definitely mindfulness is such a hot topic now. And I guess I think of mindfulness, it's the awareness in the present moment.
I say you were about to say about is mindfulness is being present and present is being mindful.
That wouldn't make it confusing at all. Yeah, it's really the awareness. I think people think, oh, be present. Okay. It's well, how do you be present? It's well, it is kind of challenging, right? I think for me, it's really, I'm a dreamer. So I think that's how I was able to see myself as an Olympian when I wasn't even a national caliber athlete is I can visualize and I can see it very clearly. But I can also just daydream and not notice anything that's going on around me. So, mindfulness for me is actually being aware of where I am in the present moment and noticing if I want to change that present moment experience, or if it's really wonderful and I want to hold on to it and not sort of move on from it. And I think, people talk about mindfulness all the time, and intellectually, it seems like kind of an easy thing. It's like, okay, we'll just be present. Well, got that. And then you actually try and you're like, wow, I can't even be present for, 3 seconds, let alone, a minute or 10 minutes or whatever it is. So it really is a practice. You have to train, your mind's ability to focus or to be aware, just like you train your muscles or, your sport specific skills.
Do you have any practical activities that are simple that people could do to go and start helping themselves with that?
My favorite practice is just diaphragmatic breathing. I think being aware of your breath can give you a huge amount of information and feedback on where you are and how. When I speak to athletes, I think we're more aware of our body and how our body feels. However, when I speak to people that are not athletic, sometimes they have like no concept of the information that their body is giving them. So they don't notice when they get stressed that they tighten, their shoulders come up to their ears, or they're clenching their jaw, or they're breathing really shallow in their chest. And I think an easy practice is just deep breaths, like noticing how the quality of your breath. And like any type of mental skill, I always say, you have to practice in like the easy, quiet moments consistently in order to notice a difference when you really need it. So, if you want to, for me, nerves is always an issue. It's still an issue. I get really nervous. But if I only take deep breaths when I'm nervous, then I start to associate those deep breaths with feeling anxious and nervous. Or if I practice them daily, even just for 1 minute, before I go to bed or when I wake up in the morning or whatever it is, just setting aside 1 minute a day. And I build up that sort of muscle memory. Then when I need it, it's already there. Like I start taking deep breaths and my body's like, okay, like I can relax. Like I notice areas in my body that feel tense and I can release them. You have to be consistent. You can't just expect that you could, just try it when you're desperate for help and it's going to be there to help you.
That's cool. I have a little exercise I get people doing. I've got a plastic frame that's not very big. I'm trying to work out what it is in inches because I work in centimeters. So you have to bear with me for a second. It's like 6 or 7 inches square. So 6 bottom sides and hollow in the middle. And I place it on the floor. It can be on a beach, on grass, on anything. And I get somebody to count backwards from 300 whilst identifying as much as possible about what's present inside the square. And then tell them at the end that I want them to tell me in as much detail as possible about every movement, every color, every texture, everything else. And at the end, I never ask them to tell me anything. But I find it takes their brain and like quietens it. Because when in any heightened state of emotion, it's very hard to change the emotion. It's almost like, when you're furious and somebody says, oh, calm down and relax, all you do is get more furious. You're like, I can't calm down. And so actually helping them come back down to like ground zero again and then work out where next. I just find that a really, really useful mental activity to do to quieten the brain down. And then when the brain's quiet, you can start making more rational decisions about who I am, how I am, and what I'm going to choose to do next. It's quite interesting. So,
yeah, I like that. I'm gonna look into that one.
It's all shareware, and I'd like to tell you there's a theorist behind it, and I learned it from somewhere, and frankly, I just invented it. So you can just have it and use it and see what happens, by all means.
Okay, awesome.
So the other thing, and this really resonates with me, and I think quite a lot of other people, that you said, if I could learn to get out of my own way, then I could learn to be better, or something like that with the words.
Mm-hmm.
How do we start getting out of our own way? Or do we never get out of our own way? Are we always in our own way? It's just a series of glass ceilings? I don't know. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think it wasn't until sort of recently that I started listening to the way that I narrated my experience as a professional athlete, and or talking about my experience in college. And I constantly would say things like, if I could just get out of my own way, if I swam out of my mind. It was like all these references to my mind was a problem. Like my body knew what to do. And it was just letting my body do what I trained so hard to do. And I think that comes with awareness. Like you can't change something you're not aware is a problem. Like so many of the things that I've sort of worked through weren't necessarily when I was an athlete. That was like the seed was planted to work on my mindset. And I've continued to do so for the last, over 10 years. And there's a lot of things that now that I know, I'm like, well, I wish I would have known this when I was younger. But that's just kind of life in general. Right. So, but yeah, I really think it comes down to looking at your thoughts, your habits, your actions, like being able to see the big picture and what you're doing, and having the space to decide to change, to not go down that rabbit hole, or to make a tweak in your routine or how you train or whatever it is to improve your performance or strengthen your mindset. And I think now I feel like a sense of, I'm not in a rush. Like I have the rest of my life to work on these things. But as an athlete, I think it's really hard because it's a very finite time frame, right? I had a little over 2 years to become an Olympian. So like I had to make some changes fast. Whereas now I still am very athletic and have a lot of athletic dreams, but I have this openness, like, oh, I can kind of experiment and see like, what does this help? Or, I don't have the time frame, that I did as an athlete.
There's a counterintuitive thing in performance, which is slowing down to speed up. And most coaches struggle to enable their athletes to do that. And then most athletes struggle to do that. There's almost an attitude of train harder, hustle harder, work harder, but almost like there's a missing definition from some of those work harder type attitudes, where of course you need to physically work hard or progressively harder. You've got to train the muscles. But if you want to get in tune with what your brain's doing, you actually have to slow down, because the brain doesn't give you very good feedback when you're belting along at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah. I just had a thought and it escaped me. I'm sorry.
No, you're
I was something that I've been thinking of a lot lately, and it's like a work in progress, a thought in progress, is just, I still wonder, like, what is my full potential? And I think when you talk, that was my point, is when you were just talking about like work harder, grind harder. Like, I think now that I'm older, I'm almost 40, I see a difference in athletes now. Like there's more access to mental health resources, to like recovery is important. When I was swimming, I felt like, and maybe this is just the way I took it in, it was just always work harder. And it was like, you don't talk about, you're struggling. If you're struggling, emotionally or mentally, you just keep working hard, and the physical act of working hard is going to solve all your problems. And I think we know now, like, that's not the case. And I think if you can find little ways, I hate using the word self-care because I think it's such
like present and mindful.
It just doesn't. Yeah, kind of. Yeah. But if you can find little ways to like release a little bit, to let go, and not always have this tension, like everything has to be hard and you have to like force your way through it. Because when I think of the races I had that were those, flow experiences that I was like, how can I do that again? There was a huge sense of just letting go and not trying so hard. And I think that was like, I tried so hard, and it's like, sure, that can get in your own way because there's this tension with that. So I definitely think it's a weird balance to sort of navigate, because letting go seems a little counterintuitive to like working hard and being the best in the world at your sport or whatever, you're doing.
I often think it's about how you frame the experiences you're about to have, be it competitively or other. And if you think you're going into a competition to compete, the question I often ask is, with whom? And the pressure ratchets up dramatically when you start trying to beat other people. And you give away huge proportions of control at exactly the same time, because you might be able to influence what they do, but you can't control it. Yeah. And one of the hardest things I think for athletes to bring on board for themselves is actually, I'm going out to swim today, kayak today, whatever it may well be, to be 1% better than I was yesterday and beat myself.
Yeah.
And yet that's not how most sports coaching is sold or done, especially at school level, not necessarily university, but, primary school, high school level. It's very much about beat the other team, beat the other person. And I wonder if that's doing any real favors for young people's mental health going forwards, because you're focusing all your effort and energy on a whole lot of stuff you can't actually control.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't really thought of it in that context, but I think, especially when you're younger and, you're trying to get a scholarship, or make the varsity team or whatever that sort of athletic goal is. There's a lot of comparison with the athletes that you're competing against. And it can feel really personal, which is hard, right? Because it's also distracting you from what you actually need to be doing. And I think, I don't know what the answer to that is, because I think there's a lot of issues in coaching that could probably be improved upon. And the way, coaches are helping, like supporting their athletes. And I think it's changed a lot. It has changed a lot, maybe some for the better and some for the worse. I don't know. It's hard to say, but I think it's sustainable, right? When it's not as sustainable when you're constantly looking outside of yourself to, get yourself pumped up to race because you want to beat someone specific. Well, what if they don't show up that day? And then you're kind of like, oh, well, I don't feel it today, Whereas when you have the drive, like this internal drive, and you want to see like, what's your own potential? How can you push yourself today? What are you capable of today? That's a more sustainable, I think, level of competition.
I work with a really incredible rugby coach at the moment. His name's Andre Trudeau. He's coached rugby all over the world, but he refuses to let any celebrations happen if we've won, unless the team's won by being better than they were in the last game. So if they've won, but the other team was the opposition was just a diabolical team and made loads of mistakes, and we capitalized them on what and won, well, that was just why are we celebrating something that wasn't better than yesterday? Whereas he equally will get the team celebrating even if they lose, but they were still better than yesterday. And I think that that we have to be very careful what it is we celebrate, because whatever you celebrate, generally you get more of. And I think that that's something in coaching of anything, whether it's business, adventure sports, traditional sports, doesn't really matter, that we've got to be very cognizant of about, well, if we celebrate a crap performance, but it was still a win, actually we're just endorsing the fact that crap performances are okay. And I just wonder where that needs to go to in terms of base level understanding of coaches helping people progress in the world.
Yeah, that's interesting, because my first sort of reaction when you started talking about that, I just thought, like, I've been coming back to the whole perfectionist thing. Like, one of the things I've realized within myself is that I never give myself credit for, I shouldn't say never, I'm doing a better job now, but historically, I've done a pretty abysmal job at giving myself credit for my success. So no matter what I did, it wasn't good enough. Like, if I won a race that, I didn't even think was possible and I won it, it was like, well, now it was moving. It was just like, don't acknowledge that, just move on to the next one. It's not like, you're still not good enough. So I think, like, for myself, I've been really working on acknowledging success and, positive strides forward, and just giving myself a moment to acknowledge it and then move on. But I also think there's a tendency to, like, you don't want to go overboard every time, like have this huge emotional outburst when you do one thing right. Yeah. You want it to be sustainable. So to, like, give yourself credit, but then, like, refocus and keep moving forward. And that is interesting. And it's probably a really beneficial thing as a team to focus on, like, how did we do, like, the best job we could do, regardless of whether we win or lose. Because especially noticing, like, when you lose, hey, I did really well. Like, that's coming back to things within your control, right? You could play out of just, like, the best game of your life and you could still lose, but you did so many amazing things along the way that you deserve to give yourself credit and to celebrate that success, even though, it didn't.
The scoreboard says something else.
Yeah. So I think that's an amazing thing, I think, as a coach to bring focus to. It's not just the win. It's how did you get there? What did you do, along the way?
It's interesting because in the rest of life outside of sport, when I look to employ people, I'm very, very heavily focused on finding people who can solve problems for themselves and do that independently and collaboratively, but equally people who can come into work tomorrow and be a little bit better at work tomorrow than they were today. And I just think that sport in general can really, really support that really useful set of characteristics for people of self-teaching and self-learning and understanding who I am. It comes back to another one. I'm going to throw another phrase in. Self-awareness is another thing that gets bounced around. That can go in the list with self-care, mindfulness, presentness, but self-awareness. People often talk about self-awareness, but then nobody says, how do you become more self-aware? And what does it really mean? And would we even like what we found if we stopped to actually become aware of who we are? There's a rabbit hole.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think maybe there would be aspects that you aren't too thrilled with. I know just within my own journey with meditation in the last couple of years, I've had insights on aspects of myself that I've found very painful and hard to acknowledge. But then you have a choice. Now you've seen it. You've shone a light on like a little corner of your mind that maybe you weren't so not too happy to see. And you have a choice about how you respond to it. You can, figure out a way to, get stronger or improve or, move forward, or you can continue to, turn off the lights and ignore it and pretend that you never really saw it, which I don't really recommend, because I think that in the long run is going to take more time and energy than just facing it, working through it.
I've had an analogy used in a program I took part in a few years ago, and they said that human beings are like a big bottle of soda, like let's say Coca-Cola for argument's sake, just as a brand everybody in the world unfortunately knows, and that we're being shaken the whole time. And unless we can kind of find ways of becoming aware that we're being shaken and then just defizz the bottle without taking the cap off, that actually at some point in time, the bottle will explode and the cap will fly off all of its own accord, with you having zero control out of it. And all of that sticky soda will just squirt over the ceiling and everywhere else. And I, as a visual reference of, well, I don't particularly want soda to squirt all over the ceiling and make a mess of the room. So actually, we've got to find ways to like, you know what I mean? Like psst, and then you screw the cap back down again. And I wonder, is that what meditation does for you? Does that help you like take the fizz out of the bottle a bit, or?
Yeah, I think it does. I think I'm trying to. I have that analogy kind of stuck in my head of the bottle fizzing. It's okay. I think when you said that, I thought, well, yeah, like if you don't want, if you have a can and you know that or a bottle and you know that someone's been shaking it, what do? You put it down and you like let it rest. Right? You give it like a little moment of stillness to sort of settle. And so I think not every time I sit down for a meditation does it feel restful or still. But just like anything, it's a work in progress. And you just, the more you practice and cultivate that stillness, like then hopefully, I feel like I have such a long journey still ahead of me. Hopefully you're able to sort of find that stillness and have those bubbles and have the can of Coke not explode all over the place.
No, sorry, I'm full of terrible analogies and metaphors and weird and wonderful.
I like it. It makes me think, though. I'm like, well, I think also if like sort of coming back to if you're holding everything in and not acknowledging, the fact that the can is you're shaking it and you just kind of keep going about your business, then it becomes impossible to keep it in and then it explodes. And so if you just practice a little stillness, practice, working on some areas that you could improve upon, little by little, you can find a little bit of improvement in whatever area you need.
The thing I've found with the bottle or can analogy is it when it explodes, 99.9% of the time, it's at the time when you least want or need it to explode, or at least able and prepared for it to explode. Oftentimes of extreme heightened emotions or alcohol consumption, to be honest, as well. I mean, that can bring it out as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And I just think that's why it's so important to find different tools and techniques and strategies to like defizz it a bit or put it down and let it rest. Because probably you've seen people crumble on the start line. And it's just that, isn't it? It's just that the can has just exploded and they've crumbled on the start line. Even somebody who you think might be faster than you can turn up and just go and is gone.
Yeah. Because those are the moments, right? When everything's there's so much on the line. All your energy is, I mean, the nerve just, it's those big moments that you're feeling all the feels. And it's hard. Yeah. If you're spending too much, I think about that a lot when I was in my 20s. I felt like I spent a lot of time, um, not acknowledging certain things and trying to hold them down. It took a lot of energy to do that, energy away from my performance and what I was trying to do. So I look back on that now and I think what would that have been like if I wasn't wasting that energy, not acknowledging things or trying to ignore them or push them down. And I had like 100% of my energy focused on sports. And I guess that's like where I get really excited and like to nerd out about like the mental side of sports. Cause to me, that just seems like that's like the path to, I don't know if there's any athlete that would ever say like, I reached my full potential. Like, I'm sure Michael Jordan, Michael Phelps, like all of these amazing athletes are still going to say like, oh, I could have done this little thing better, or I think I could have pushed a little bit harder. So I don't think there's necessarily like this race that you're going to have that you're like, that's it. Couldn't do any better. Like, I'm going to retire now. I think, there's always a potential for more improvements. But I think, if you have 100% of your energy focused on that task, that race, that you probably are going to get a little closer than most people. That makes sense.
Complete sense. Complete sense. And you mentioned the word, and I'm battling with this next thing myself in how I work with my clients, because you mentioned flow a little while ago. The races that seem to happen, or it doesn't even have to be races. It can be anything that you're doing that seems to happen by magic. Everything goes quiet, everything goes still. You almost can't remember it. It feels effortless. Have you got any closer to working out how to bottle that sensation in a way, or enable people to recreate it? Because we've all driven home and got home and gone, how on earth did I get here? Like, I'm here, I'm at home, and the car's got no dents and scratches, which means I haven't crashed it. And I wasn't stopped by the police, because I probably know that. And if I'd hit somebody, I probably would know that. And so it'd be a fair assumption that you've done a really remarkably good job of driving, the same as in that race. And how do we recreate that for ourselves? Because if you could find a way of pressing a button and having that in every race or everything you do, you'd be an Olympian the entire time and probably on the podium.
Yeah. I think it's one of those frustrating things that like the harder you try, the farther away you are from achieving it. When I look back on those races that I sort of had that flow experience, like I remember them vividly. I can like put myself there. I can remember like just everything about it. But there was that feeling of like effortless. And when I was in that experience, like I remember thinking like, why did this happen today? Like what was different? It felt more like, oh, the stars are aligning and all of a sudden I'm going to have this flow experience and I'm not in control of that. However, I think you can sort of dig around and find that there's a lot of aspects you are in control of and you can focus on those. So obviously like working hard is the foundation, you have to put the work in physically. But then comes into play all of those mental skills, like improving your focus or being able to regulate your emotions, like knowing the energy level that you need. Like people are so different, I was really quiet before races. I did not like talking to people. I had my headphones on. I would get really inside my head, like just terrified, like sitting by myself, terrified. I know other people that are like dancing around and they want to like talk to you. And, you have to know what works for you. And, it's good to be inspired by athletes you look up to and notice like, oh, well, what do they do before a competition? Or, how are they doing that? But ultimately you have to figure it out for yourself. And then coming back to that awareness part, like being able to look at that and think like, I think I could do better. Like I could improve my focus. I could improve this aspect. I'm going to work on this and like chip away at those things. I don't think it's going to guarantee you that you're going to have a flow experience, but I think you will potentially, be a little bit, I guess I'm going to use the word luck. Like you'll get a little luckier, because you're working towards all those aspects that come into play.
You can narrow luck down, can't you? You can make yourself more lucky by manipulating the odds, maybe doing more of the known things. I often look at routine mapping at quite a minute level in the 6 hours before a competition with somebody and track everything, even cortisol levels through the ear, the stressor chemical. And I've never yet got to a point where you can get somebody into a flow state or on demand. If I could get there, frankly, I'm going to give up everything else I do and just go and do that like all over the world, because I don't think there's an athlete or coach or sporting body anywhere in the world that wouldn't pay you millions to go and produce that for them. But you can increase the likelihood, as you say, by knowing that you've had 4 events over the past 3 years and you've hit a flow state or sensation in each one of those events. And here are the contributing factors. And start to map out that routine to increase the luck level, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, I was always, and I've said this several times, but nerves was like a really big part of my experience. So I just like would feel terrified before a race. I wanted to hide. Like I would think about hiding, like where can I go? No one's going to know that I don't show up. I never did that, thankfully. But the way I internalize the physical sensations of being nervous. So like my hands would get numb. Like sometimes they would just go completely numb. My throat would get really tight. I get butterflies in my stomach. Even if I was really hot, I would feel like cold, like shivery cold. And it just felt so uncomfortable that I wanted it to stop. And I always thought like, I need to change that. I want to feel confident and calm before a race. And then I realized quite a bit later that was good. Like that was good to feel that way. For me, that was like my body was telling me I am ready to go. Like, let me loose. I am going to do my thing. And it was all of the way that I was narrating that experience in my head that needed to change. So it went from thinking it was a bad thing to being really excited. Like, yes, like I ran a marathon last year and I did not put the work in that I obviously did as a professional swimmer, but as a mother of 2, I felt like I did a pretty good job of training for it. And I wanted to feel terrified before I started. I wanted to have those like nerves. And in my mind, I've just changed it. I was like, that's an exciting, like positive thing, even though it didn't change, it still feels horrible. And it's not like a comfortable feeling to have, but my shift, just the way that I experience it is exciting. I did not that way the day of my marathon. And I think that kind of comes back to like putting in the work. Like, yes, I ran to train for my body to be able to run a marathon, but I wasn't a dedicated working, it was more like, how can I fit in a run today when I have a lot of other things on my plate? It's like when I was swimming, obviously my whole focus was on training. And I think that's kind of the thing. It's like the more effort you put into it, the luckier you're going to get when it comes to that flow experience.
And I think it's interesting. I think for any coaches who are listening to this, and hopefully there'll be a bunch, there's a lot of, I don't know what to call it, pop psychology or myths out there about maybe getting people hyped up and aggressive or getting everybody calm or whatever. And everybody's a unique human being. And when they hit that 18 to 21 sort of age, university sort of age, they've had so much life experience and learning by then that they've got their own version of them that they need to feel, and it'd be okay to feel and permitted to feel before whatever it is they're going to go and do. And so, there's a bit of bringing the team together, maybe, but actually letting the quiet people be quiet and the nervous people be nervous and the excited people be excited. And even with some of the rugby work I do, we actually have 2 changing rooms often, and we have a quiet changing room and a loud changing room, and you can choose which one you sit in, because some people need to go and hide in the corner. And and I have to be honest, the longer I've spent playing with this as a job, the more I'm getting convinced that far more people need calming down before they compete, as opposed to hyping up, than maybe everybody believes to be true. I've seen a lot of people in everything from adventure sports to traditional sports to Olympic sports who almost let themselves peak too early because they amp themselves up. And then when the gun goes or the whistle goes, they've hit the peak. And the only way from the peak for that bell curve is coming back down again. And so they do pretty good for the first quarter of a game or a race. And then afterwards, you start to see that like catastrophe bit coming in. And so I'm just finding, and I want to talk about meditation more in a second, if that's okay. I'm just finding that more people would benefit from meditation and calming than maybe people realize.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm obviously like really passionate and excited about it. So I'm totally biased. I found for me, like just through my journey, right? When I was swimming, everything was like grind, work hard, like keep pushing. Then I graduated, I retired, I became a mom. I started studying yoga and Pilates and like meditation. And that's great. Like I started to get more of that sort of quiet, like slower paced practice into my life. But I really like some days I need burpees and I need like that, like really hard, sweaty, push yourself workout. And I've begun over the last couple of years to explore. It's hard as a mother of 2 to like, I hate the word balance because I don't really think it exists, but to like merge those 2 together, right? To give yourself that like outlet to be competitive, to like push hard. And like, I love that. Like, that's where I feel like when my body is moving consistently, because I'm more drawn to like endurance things, I just feel like I get into this zone where I feel inspired and like everything is great. But I think I've been able to, like, when I just do one or the other, I feel a little bit out of sync. And having that, like a meditation practice to like have practices that kind of slow you down, it gives you more, it gives me that energy to like really push when I have the opportunity to do that. And I think that is an exciting, part, I think, with mental training is like, how can you, now I feel like I'm going off on a tangent, but like so often with like, when you hear about mindfulness or meditation or mental skills, I feel like there's a, like the need in mental health, which there is, and it's an amazing tool to have. But it's a way, like when I talk to some of my friends, like, well, why didn't you work with a sports psychologist or a mental or skills coach or, whatever it is? And there's that sort of disconnect between, well, I don't have a problem, or, it's like they don't want to acknowledge maybe that they have some things to work through. Whereas you can also look at it as like you are strengthening areas that are going to help you perform better. And that is like a huge, I think it just opens like the possibilities up, right? To like be able to work on both aspects, your mental, the physical, and like really go for it with whatever sport you're in, or, you know, whatever you're working on. I felt like I totally went off on a tangent on that one.
No, it's really relevant. One of my coaches said to me a few years ago, he asked me the question, he said, what do you least want to think about or spend time doing? And I and least want to believe could be true. And so I came up with this list, and he looked at the list and he looked at me in the eyes and he said, you do know, for you to achieve the goals that you want, this is probably the list you need to have as your to-do list, and probably the list you need to put the most amount of time, effort, and energy into. I groaned internally and didn't believe him, but I can honestly say a few years later, he was 100% correct. You don't have to have a problem to get... like athletes and swimmers don't go to the gym because they need to lose weight and get in shape. Do you know what I mean? They don't have a problem of being fat. I say unless they do fishing or darts, maybe, but that's a different story. But they generally don't have that as a problem. So athletes are very happy to go to the gym to go and progress the development of their physical body to be faster, stronger, more agile, whatever it may well be. Well, working with somebody like yourself is exactly the same thing. It's not that your brain's obese. It's just that it could be fitter, stronger, healthier, more agile, and more able.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that now you see things all the time. Oh, it's all mental, and it's 90% mental and 10% talent, or whatever it is. And then I ask people, and I'm like, well, what are you doing? If the mental aspect is so important, what are you doing to strengthen your mind? And then like the majority, it's like, oh, well, nothing. It's like, if it's that important, you're leaving such a big aspect of your performance and your success up to chance. Like, I think I have strengths, mental strengths, I guess. Like, I'm very stubborn and I will persevere even if I embarrass myself and I fail repeatedly. I don't like doing it. And I have been very hard on myself for those failures, but I've always just got back up and kept going. I consider myself like a pretty mentally tough person. I think I have a high pain tolerance. And those things are great, right? They've helped me in my pursuit of athletic and life goals. However, I also have aspects of my mental skills, I guess, that are not helping me, that are holding me back. And if I really want to go for my dreams, or, go for, like, why not look at all of that, your strengths and your weaknesses, and make your weaknesses your strengths? And you can, like, if that's that growth mindset, right? If you just think it's fixed, like, oh, I have a low pain tolerance, or like, I'm scared and I can't, that's just who I am. It's like, no, that's just something you're experiencing and feeling right now, but you can make a difference. You can change, you can improve upon it. You just have to know that it needs a little attention.
Yeah. And that requires a change for a lot of people at their values and beliefs level, where they actually can believe that I can control this, I can be better at it, and I can adapt it or change it or whatever it may well be. It's a pretty profound place to be. So we've bounced around the topic of meditation quite a lot. And meditation has a really interesting, it attracts certain people to it. And a lot of sporty guys, it seems to turn off as well. They have the idea of chanting and being a hippie and not achieving anything, and maybe smoking too much marijuana. And there's all sorts of stigmas, I suppose, attached to meditation. So can you help me start to unpack meditation and maybe pop some of those limiting beliefs that people have around it, and what it really is and how it really benefits you if you choose to engage with it?
Yeah. So some of the things you mentioned, I think, are like, you could lump that into like myths on yoga. I mean, that's just like so like a wide range of beliefs, right, that meditation kind of gets clumped under. And there's definitely different forms of meditation. There's chanting meditation, and So I guess I would recommend looking at, just if you try one meditation and you don't like it, to recognize that there are different types of meditation that you could try. When you hear the word mindfulness and mindfulness meditation, it's not a chanting meditation. Typically you have an object that you are resting your attention on. So it's usually, not usually, but like typically is your breath, right? So you're focused on your breath, and that's where your attention lies. So every time your mind wanders away from your breath, which it will repeatedly, you notice that your mind has wandered and you bring it back to your breath. And I think a lot of people I hear people say this all the time when they say, I can't do yoga because I'm not flexible. And I always wonder, well, how are you going to get flexible if you don't actually work on flexibility? And and the same I hear with meditation. It's like, I can't meditate because I can't turn off my mind. And there's this, myth that in order to be a good meditator, there's like a light switch in your brain and you just turn off your mind and you're just super still and quiet and nothing's going on in there. And you have to be sitting in the lotus position on a mountaintop or whatever it is. And that is not the case. You can sit, in a chair, you can stand, you can walk. There's plenty of different ways to meditate. But when your mind does wander, which is going to happen, that little moment where you realize your mind has wandered and you choose to bring it back to your breath, or whatever your object of meditation is, that's like the little rep where you're strengthening your mind's ability to focus on your breath. And if you relate that to sport, you take that simple acknowledgement of like, oh, my mind has wandered, and with kindness and not judging that, not saying like, oh, you're a bad meditator, your mind wandered, just being like, oh, look, there it went again. My mind has wandered, and bringing it back to your breath. That's you're strengthening your brain. And then you take that to your sport, like open water swimming, when you're swimming in the ocean for 2 hours, and you get distracted by something, whether it's a competitor or you're cold, tired, pain, like whatever it is, every athlete knows there's tons of things that can distract you on race day. You have that little moment. Oh, my mind has wandered. I'm just going to bring it back to my focal point. So maybe that is just your technique, or, whatever you're choosing to focus on, coming back to the present moment. And that's where I see like the connection between the seated practice, and then actually applying it to your sport, because there are so many distractions. There are so many things out of your control, and just that ability to sort of notice, oh, okay, like there I went again. I got distracted. I'm going to come back to wherever I am. Where are my feet right now? You're swimming there, maybe it's not your feet, but, to bring your attention back to what you're doing. And I think that has so much value. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of misconceptions about meditation. And I would just say, be open and try more than one kind, because there's definitely a lot of different types of meditation. And you might be surprised by what resonates with you if you just give it a try.
And it's quite cool at the moment because the barriers to entry for meditation are being broken down quite rapidly. So 10 years ago, if you wanted to try meditation, you'd often, especially in the sporting environment, you'd often need to go and find somebody who would guide you through a form of meditation, or to teach you how to meditate on your own. And that would involve a cash commitment and a time commitment. There's lots of really cool apps like that one Calm I saw the other day out there that you can just put on your phone and plug your earpieces in and sit on the sofa or in your back garden and see whether you like it or not, or see whether it can work for you. And there's a fair chance that it won't be as easy as you want it to be, and it may well require more repetition. But the barriers to entry are so low at the moment that you don't have to go and turn up to a weird place with weird people who you don't know and go and see what happens anymore. I think that's really very cool.
Yeah, definitely. I think the access is, there's tons of apps. You can find YouTube videos. There's a lot of resources out there. I do think it helps. Like I have a meditation teacher that I talk to, and being part of a community is helpful along, the path to practicing, and to be able to ask questions and be, there's plenty of times where I just like need to talk to someone about my experience, and it's been really helpful for me. But I started with apps and reading and, just trial and error. So there's definitely a lot of access out there if you don't have money that you can get a lot of great information.
And I'd encourage people to give it a go. I treat myself as a bit like a human experiment on occasions. And I got quite heavily into hypnosis and hypnotherapy. Well, I have been, I suppose, say in the past tense, still in the present tense for about the past 12 years. And I can't remember when it was. It was just after I'd moved to South Africa. So it's probably like 8 years or so ago now. Somebody online started talking about an audio track for a hypnotic past life regression. And I was like, well, and how beneficial it was. And I'm like, well, if you're going to be open-minded about the world and you're going to be asked clients to be open-minded about the world, you better give these things a go. And so I plugged my earphones in and woke up 3 hours later. And I have no idea what happened in the 3 hours. I just started off sitting on the sofa and literally, but woke up having not been asleep. It was one of the weirdest experiences ever. But to dismiss stuff as, well, it won't work for me. I always wonder, what if that is the one missing ingredient that you are missing in terms of, I don't know, for you going to the World Championships and then going to the Olympics? What if meditation was the one thing? I'd always kick myself if I knew that there was something available and then dismissed it. I'd kick myself afterwards if I didn't achieve what I wanted to and hadn't tried that one thing. And so I just think people need to be maybe braver and give it a go.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's a lot of examples of athletes that speak positively about meditation, that if you're skeptical, you can look up Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant and their meditation teacher, George Mumford, who's a huge inspiration for me. And you can find examples of that and what it looks like for them, and then to give it a go. Because you're right. Like, what do you have to lose? Like, are you going to regret spending 15 minutes a day in silence? Like, I mean, maybe you could. I don't know. I don't think there's like a huge risk involved. I mean, it's definitely not I say that, and then it's not like a one size fits all, like Band-Aid that's going to cure all your problems. And, it could not be very helpful if you are suffering from, serious depression or anxiety. It's not like it's something that's just going to solve everything. However, yeah, I've always got confidence from knowing that I've done everything I can to be my best. And now that I know about meditation, I'm like, well, yeah, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you try it and just see if it works for you? And if it doesn't, and you give it a good shot and you're like, I just didn't like it. Then, you don't have that little voice in the back of your head saying, what if I would have tried that?
I remember,
also think,
oh, go on.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I was just going to bringing it back to what you said about swimmers lifting weights. Is I always think it's interesting is like, if I came out and said, like, I could, I'll train you to be a stronger, fitter athlete, and we only have to train for 10 minutes one time a month. No one everybody would be like, well, that's not how it works. You have to like work, I swam 6 days a week. I lifted weights. Like every day you have to do something. And I think generally people agree with that. But then when it comes to the mental side, I think people are like, oh, well, I took a webinar, now I know about mindfulness or meditation or whatever it is. It's like, no, you have to train just like you're training your body. And it's not just once a month or once every 2 months thing. It's like, how can you incorporate it into your day? It doesn't have to add on another hour to your training, but like, how can you include it into your day? That it becomes just another aspect of your training.
Well, and we all know, and it's very well recognized in sports science, that actually performance increase really happens through appropriate rest and recovery. That's generally where you get faster. And so if you need adequate rest and recovery, why not just sit on the couch for 15 minutes or in your backyard or wherever it is and meditate for a while? I mean, it's still the body's recovering. I guess as you said, what have you got to lose? Not a lot, really.
Yeah, exactly. And I think especially now with, phones and social media, and it's like relaxation has turned into like a zoning out on social media experience, which is not exactly restful. You don't know when you can open up, Instagram with the intention to just laugh or, be entertained. And then you can see a bunch of stuff that upsets you in some way. And it's like, well, that's not definitely helping you with your mental space or in recovery. Whereas if like sitting in silence or focusing on your breath or meditating or just doing something quiet and calming, that can be really, really rejuvenating.
Super cool. So you're currently at grad school, master's in sports psychology. I suppose as we come towards the end of our time together, I'm very curious about what next. You're a mum, you've got sports psychology, you've got marathons, but what's next in your bucket list or wish list of things to achieve in the world?
Well, if we want to focus on wish list things to achieve, I've always said I would do an Ironman. So that's definitely on my list of things to do. I recently found this race series called Attilo. Have you heard of that?
No, tell me more.
I found it and I was like, how have I not known about this for so long? But it's like a run. So it's I don't know how to actually ride a road bike and I'm kind of clumsy. So like training on a road bike is a little bit scary for me, but the running and swimming is like what I love. So having a race that's like a distant, it's an endurance race and it's a lot of like short runs and swims. So that's kind of my next, hopefully if things are open and it happens, there's a race in Catalina in November. That's kind of my focus right now, or, bucket list item. As far as adventuring bucket lists, besides I grew up with 2 goals. One was to be an Olympian, which I didn't quite achieve, but I got really close. And the second is to swim with a blue whale. So I turned 40 this year. And that, like, for years, I've been saying for my 40th birthday, I'm going to go to Sri Lanka. I'm going to swim with a blue whale and we're going to become best friends. And that's not happening this year, but it's still like on the top of my list. So it's not going to be my 40th birthday adventure, but hopefully sometime soon.
Swimming with a blue whale. Wow.
Yeah.
That would be incredible. That's terrifying and exciting and everything all at the same time. That would be amazing.
I know. I get just thinking about it. I feel like, I don't know, could I actually get in the water? And some, I'm not next to them, but like see them in the underwater in the distance. Like they're so massive. It's a little overwhelming just to think about, but I've had this, I remember being a tiny little girl, my mom and I measured out the length of a baby blue whale in our apartment. And that stuck with me, and I've been fascinated ever since. And I've just always I just really, really want to do it. It's just like one of the life goals that hopefully I will achieve sometime soon.
I've kayaked in the sea with dolphins and orcas and all sorts of big sea mammals. And my gut tells me you'll be able to swim a lot closer safely to it than you think. That they're very, very, very. I've never kayaked near a blue whale, so I don't know. But I'd assume they're very similar to the other sort of sea mammals out there, and they are far more aware of what's going on about them than we would ever believe. And probably far more intelligent than we would believe as well. So my gut says you could get very, very, very close and still be very safe and very comfortable. That's a whole YouTube video coming. You know that. You need to take a photo. Wow. Cool. Well, listen, Micha, thank you so much for what you bring to the world and for helping or with me tonight, sharing your expertise and debunking some of the myths around mind games in sport, and I suppose the importance of the brain in sport. And if people say it's such a big deal, they need to go and do something about it. I really like that practical, let's go do something. So thank you so much. If people want to follow you, reach out to you, or do anything of that sort of thing, where's best to find Micha?
Yeah, well, I have a website, michashaw.com, and then I'm on Instagram at Micha Shaw. And recently I joined Twitter. I'm not quite sure why, because I haven't actually done anything on there. But technically I am on Twitter too, so...
But yeah, sending smoke signals might be easier than Twitter, though, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward to another conversation at some point in time. Maybe in person one day. That would be super cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It was lovely speaking with you.
Likewise.